things that are Caesar, and the things that are God that are God. It's then developed by Augustine in the City of God. It then manifests and explodes in the Reformation. Read Article 28 of the Augsburg Confession, where they're making this pronounced distinction of church and state. What that led to, as Edward Grant, the historian, will tell you, is that it actually led to the development of modern science, because Christians had separation ideas. Not everything had to be controlled by the Pope. They allowed states to do their things, and they had this separation. That allowed science to develop into its own institution. It gave us modern science. You don't have to take my word for it. Read Edward Grant, Toby E. Huff, James Ungariano, Noah J. Efron. This is just what the consensus of historians of science have to say. Yeah, I think I addressed most of the actual points relevant for the debate. I don't have much else to say, so I'll yield the last few seconds.
We'll send it. We'll kick it over to Dr. Krauss for his 8-minute rebuttal as well.
So much to say, so little time.
Secular humanist Lawrence Krauss gets absolutely demolished by Christian Mike Jones in this epic debate. Lawrence Krauss thought he could go in there and just argue the typical atheist talking points, you know, same old, Christianity bad, God an evil dictator, all that type of stuff. But Mike Jones actually what goes in there, and he actually brings it. And Lawrence Krauss simply had no chance. He struggled to get through this debate, as you'll see. Let's see Christian Mike Jones debates atheist Lawrence Krauss.
Is to be born ill and commanded to be well. To be born ill and commanded to be well, something you can never fulfill. The belief that somehow those that don't believe in something, in this case Christ, are doomed not to just suffer in their own life as a kind of North Korean hell, but are doomed for all eternity by a cosmic dictator who makes the North Korean dictator look small. Just for the simple act of not believing, Christianity tells you are doomed for not just the 310 years that you're on earth, but for all eternity.
So let me start off by saying, when I saw this thumbnail, it was this dude and then, you know, Mike Jones, the other guy. I didn't know which one was on the side of which, but I immediately, just by looking, was able to tell, yeah, this dude's probably the atheist here. And how could I tell? Well, because he's wearing the atheist starter kit. You know, he's got the jacket, he's got the fedora. You know, what's with the atheist and the fedora? He looks like he's cosplaying as Indiana Jones. What is this? Is this just the atheist uniform? Like, tell me you're an atheist without telling me you're an atheist. Oh, stupid fedora. Oh, Indiana Jones getup. Yep, that's the atheist.
And you're given free will, but you're damned for using it. Now, when we talk about Christian moral, I never know quite, when people say Christian morals and ethics, I never know what they're talking about.
30
because
seconds.
I heard different ones from different ones. How long do I have?
30 seconds.
Okay. Turning the other cheek, loving others as you love yourself, accept your lot. Okay? Well, I also got this for me today. This is what is. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is learning not to fear the Lord. Not to fear any idea. Maybe I will just say that the other thing that religion is supposed to be good for is giving comfort to those. But as Christopher and others have pointed out, that giving false comfort is worse than giving comfort at all. It's like giving a placebo to someone who's sick and needs something real. So telling someone, you don't have to believe this, but if you're ready to die, this will give you comfort, is, as Christopher pointed out, the worst thing you can do for something. It's an insult to the human intellect. Thank you.
Thank you for that opening, Dr. Krauss. We will
This moderator here looks like Phil Dunphy.
switch it over to the rebuttals. I have the timer set for you, Mike. The floor is all yours for 8 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Krauss. I want to remind you and everyone of the debate. The debate is not what we don't like about Christianity or what secularism. The debate is about the effects, which is better for society. I gave clear scientific study.
You don't want to debate the effects on society. Atheists don't like that.
You said that you think they're debunked. I'd really love to see your
like to see
research
the
on
data.
that. I'm talking.
Okay.
Anyway, you'll have your time later. No, none of these studies have been debunked, and that's why I cited several finding similar results, including systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So we need to keep that in mind. You spent a lot of time arguing that original sin is disgusting in child abuse. What research shows that the belief in original sin leads to harmful effects is what I would want to ask you. You may not like this, but if you actually read some historians of science, Noah J. Ephron, James Ungariano, Edward Grant, they'll tell you, surprisingly, the belief in original sin was crucial for the development of the scientific method. You can read Of Popes and Unicorns by James Ungariano, Noah J. Ephron's chapter, and Galileo Goes to Jail and Other Myths. They point out is that the idea of original sin convinced a lot of early scientists that they were fallible. They had to keep doing constant experimentation to verify their results. And they conclude that belief and other Christians' belief helped develop science, including the scientific method. So you should be thanking Christianity and the doctrine of original sin. You mentioned things like you said liberalism, enlightenment has made the world what it is, and the only person you cited was Jonathan Rauch. Well, Rauch isn't an historian. He's a journalist. Let's see what actual historians have to say. Tom Holland says the evolution of the concept of human rights, mediated as it has been since the Reformation by Protestant jurists and philosophers, has come to obscure its original authors. It derived not from the ancient Greeks or Rome, but from the period of history condemned by all right-thinking revolutionaries as a lost millennium. It came from the canon lawyers of the Middle Ages. Samuel Moyne says the thesis of his book, Christian Human Rights, is that this is a project of the Christian right, not the secular left. Brian Tierney, in his book, The Idea of Natural Rights, says the humanistic jurisprudence of the 12th century, especially the writing of the medieval Decritus, may provide a better starting point for the investigation in the origin of natural right theories than either the 14th century nominalists or the capitalists of the early modern world, okay? And you can go back to writers like Godfrey of Fontenines for that, as well as William of Ockham for that kind of stuff. So actually, no. Human rights, as historians will note, came out of the development of Christianity. And you say we have Christian ethics for 2,000 years. This is a straw man. This is an oversimplification. As Tom Holland says, Christianity was like a depth charge. It took time for Christian ethics to slowly spread and saturate the culture. It didn't just, by the time of Constantine, okay, there was only 10% Christians in the world at that point. When the Muslim invaders are coming through, they're going to cities like Karhai, and they're finding more pagans still there. Pagan temples were opened like the 900s. It took time for Christianity to spread. At the founding of this nation, only 17% of people belonged to a church, according to people like Rodney Stark, who's a sociologist. So the idea that Christianity just took over 2,000 years is absurd, non-historical nonsense. It took time for these things to happen. So he says missionaries destroyed societies. Okay, that doesn't come up in the research. I can cite so many studies on this. Like, for example, Robert Woodbury's work. Read papers like The Shadow of the Empire, The Missionary Roots of Liberal Democracy, where he notes missionaries actually went in and they stopped colonial powers from abusing native people. You can read stuff like Protestant missionaries are associated with Protestant missionaries undermine political authority, ? Evidence from Peru. You can also look at things like the long-term effects of Protestant activity in China, competitive religious and entrepreneurs, Christian missionaries, and female education in colonial and post-colonial India. Okay, the reason why the world is so educated and healthy has a lot to do with what Protestant missionaries went out and did. There's a lot of research on this. You said that Christianity claims sex is bad. If you read the Song of Solomon, sir, I think you should read that. Might learn something there. No, and let me remind you what I said in my opening statement. I did not say that higher birth rates are necessarily better. I specifically said you have to have at least a sustainable birth rate. Secular societies cannot produce those. Only religious societies do. Okay? So yes, Muslim societies, Hindu societies, Christian societies, they have sustainable birth rates. That's a base for them looking to see if they're actually good. What do they produce after that? Secularism can't even get over that hurdle because it can't generate progress for multiple generations. That's a problem. You mentioned homosexuality. Again, you need to study the research on this. Christianity does not lead to LGBTQ prejudice. And let me cite you some work. So how right-wing authoritarianism mediates the relationship between Protestant religious denominations and attitudes towards homosexuality. There's also a great paper called Unpacking the Drivers of LGBTQ Legislation, which says, regarding the main setbacks for the promotion of LGBT rights, the empirical results suggest that religious affiliation can act as a cultural constraint in countries where Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism are the most followed religions. Contrarily, religious affiliation does not seem to be constraining LGBTQ plus legislation in Christian majority countries. So this idea that we're going to cause more prejudice, it does not show up in the research there. So you can laugh at it all you want. Yeah. I am a man of science. I want to follow what the science says, not my personal feelings. So I think you should consider that possibility. So you mentioned we don't have free will. I have no idea what that has to do with anything in the debate. Okay, the debate is about what the effects of Christianity and secularism produce. Whatever that has to do with the debate, I have no clue. You mentioned the Catholic Church being problematic. Well, the Catholic Church is the largest non-governmental provider of healthcare around the world. So I'd like you to, again, research shows Christianity invented orphanages and hospitals. We invented independent universities. Okay, in the ancient world, they had institutions for learning, but they didn't have independent universities with governing boards. Historians like Edward Grant note it was Christian societies that produced these independent universities that could produce their own studies without being governed by a king or a pope or an imam or some rich benefactor. They could do their own work. This is something that comes out of the Christian society, which invented the separation of church and state. It starts with Jesus is saying, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and the things that are God. It's then developed by Augustine in the City of God. It then manifests and explodes in the Reformation. Read Article 28 of the Augsburg Confession, where they're making this pronounced distinction of church and state. What that led to, as Edward Grant, the historian, will tell you, is that it actually led to the development of modern science, because Christians had separation ideas. Not everything had to be controlled by the Pope. They allowed states to do their things, and they had this separation. That allowed science to develop into its own institution. It gave us modern science. You don't have to take my word for it. Read Edward Grant, Toby E. Huff, James Ungariano, Noah J. Efron. This is just what the consensus of historians of science have to say. Yeah, I think I addressed most of the actual points relevant for the debate. I don't have much else to say, so I'll yield the last few seconds.
Holy crap. Cue the Simpsons, cue that part in the Simpsons where it's like, stop, he's already dead. I mean, does the debate even continue after this? Lawrence Krauss wishes he had an Indiana Jones whip so he could have whipped that microphone out of his hand, because that's what he would have needed to do to have any sort of chance of winning this. Mike Jones bringing the receipts, bringing the scientific studies. So much for Christians being anti-science, huh? I mean, if this were a Killer Instinct game, I would be right there going, Ultra Combo. I mean, that was just an absolute blowout. Does Lawrence Krauss have any sort of decent rebuttal? I guess we'll have to see, but before we see, I ask you if you enjoyed that, smash that like button. Let's continue.
We'll send it. We'll kick it over to Dr. Krauss for his 8-minute rebuttal as well.
So much to say, so little time.
Listen, man, we could just declare winner right now if he wants. He doesn't have to rebut. I mean, this is like a 2-hour and 22-minute debate here, or it's a video, 2-hour, 22-minute video. So, I mean, I don't know what happens here. He's already struggling. He's cooked.
I think it's interesting. You sort of disprove your own point, I think, but 4 or 5 times. But I think it's really interesting you point out that in the founding of the United States, only 17% of the people were Christian. People will hear in this election that we're a Christian nation, that the ideals of the country are Christian. The fact that you just pointed out is the ideals that most Americans value. The ideals of not just the Declaration of Independence, but the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, were determined by people in a society that was secular, a secular society, not a religious society, the society that in principle values freedom and democracy, or it certainly used to. So to argue that somehow these things were spawned by Christianity in a society which you point out very few people are Christian is just one thing that is obviously nonsense. In terms of secular people and self-sustaining and having a society that produces enough kids to sustain itself, I'm happy to say that my acquaintance Elon Musk is single-handedly ensuring that society is self-sustainable, and he happens to be a secularist. that it is a key point of history, and it would be ridiculous to deny the fact that the liberal Enlightenment, which created the society that has produced everything in this room, and that's responsible for the quality of our lives, the freedom we have to be able to debate, to discuss, to disagree, grew out of a system in which the only game in town was Christianity. The only universities were Christian. There was no other choice if you wanted to be educated. Absolutely, absolutely, the liberal Enlightenment grew out of a world that was Christian. But that's the key point. It grew up. We have Christianity to thank for a world that we're able to grow out of. Just like we thank our parents for having initiated something, but the point of becoming an adult is growing out of it. Some parents tell us about Santa Claus and other things, and to give examples of how you should behave or not behave. And the whole point of becoming an adult is you grow up and you think for yourselves. And so we do have Christianity to thank in the West for the system of universities, which initially were all religious and then all became secular. And what happened when they became secular? You had the Enlightenment, the rise of science, the rise of democracy, the rise of all of the ideas which were around, as I repeat, empirically, for a world that was dominated by Christianity for over 15 millennia before that. So if you're asking for empirical evidence of how a secular world relates to a Christian world, ask whether you'd want to live in the Middle Ages or today. It's just a simple question. We're not in the Middle Ages, we're in today, because we live in a world where secular values, the fact that no one has a monopoly on what's right or what's moral, but in fact we come to those decisions by open questioning, debate, a dialectic among society, and a willingness to, in fact, allow people to speak up and disagree, produce a society that ultimately we think, in fact, as my good friend Steven Pinker has written a very good book to show, is in spite of what we hear about the violence in the world today, that the Enlightenment has produced a society in which ultimately is freer and less violent than it was before. If you want to know, I mean, just read about what daily life was in the 15th century and ask yourself which society you'd rather live in. So, I mean, I find it absolutely ridiculous that anyone would claim that somehow a secular society is evil or somehow flawed, when in fact that's a secular society has taken us out of the world that we grew up in, the 15th century world of pre-enlightenment, to a world of enlightenment, the world in which you and I live, and the world in which we can have the discussion we can have today that I guarantee you, we could have not had 500 years ago. That's all.
Thank you very much for that rebuttal as well.
Oof. Man, he really struggled with all that. The best he could come up with is, well, yeah, sure, the foundations were Christian, but we grew up. We grew up, and now we could, and now secularism has pretty much allowed us to flourish and improve upon what Christian began, pretty much. That's really the best comeback. He had 8 minutes. And he couldn't even finish all 8 minutes because, I mean, that's the best that on the spot he could struggle to come up with. Meanwhile, Mike Jones over there clickety-clacketing away on the keyboard, so I'm pretty sure he has a pretty solid rebuttal. Let's see what Mike Jones has to say.
We'll kick it into the 5-minute rebuttals. Mike, the floor is all yours.
All right, well, thank you. Again, I will remind people the debate is which is better for society today. We've not seen a lot of evidence that secularism has actually
I said look
better.
around.
Okay. Do you...
We'll, just to be sure we don't interrupt each other's
Yeah,
thoughts.
can you back up a little bit for me there? Yeah, so again, okay, we've not really...
Lawrence Krauss needs to know that a strong, independent Christian is talking, and he better sit down and listen so he could get educated.
The evidence that secularism is actually better than Christian societies today. We've just been told, oh, it produced stuff in the room. What's your evidence for this, okay? You said I disproved my point. Well, we're not debating if the U.S. was founded as a Christian nation. But if you want to claim it's secular, great. Guess what was allowed in the Constitution? Slavery. So you just said secularism is responsible for slavery in this country. Thank you. We appreciate that. And actually, if you read people like Robert Fogel, for example, as well as Rodney Stark. As people started becoming, and as this nation kept going, more people were attending church, and we saw the Second Great Awakening. And out of that, as Ben Wright argues, we actually saw the abolitionist movement come about, which led to the Civil War and the ending of slavery. So again, we have Christianity to thank for the abolitionist movement, which apparently secularism gave us with the founding of this nation. So we have that problem. He says liberalism grew out of Christianity. Well, okay, what are you trying to say there? You should be saying thank you. Great, excellent. So you said we have Christianity to thank for the world we grew out of. The problem is, you say that we should just keep growing out of it. You can't. You can't produce sustainable birth rates that can produce populations of secular humanists that can just keep going on and generating more progress in a society for multiple generations. So you can't grow out of Christianity. You're going to revert back to Christianity, as sociologists like Eric Kaufman have been pointing out for a long time now. So, okay, and again, now, how can so that's an important point. You ask, do you want to live in the Middle Ages or live today? Well, I have a better question. Do you want to live in the Middle Ages with a bunch of Christians or with no Christians? Because as you have already admitted, we wouldn't get the society we have today if it wasn't for what the Christians were doing in the Middle Ages. And again, a lot of the progress that's being generated is still coming from Christian values. This is all the research I cited in my opening statement. Okay, that's again an important point. Also, real quick, I did not say secularism was evil. I didn't call it Islam. I said that it's just less optimal than what we actually get in terms of it. I far prefer to live in a secular society than an Islamic society, because a secular society will die and just be replaced by something else. And I'm going to argue I have a better chance of turning into a Christian society than in an Islamic society, for example. So, again, referring back to my opening statement, again, when we compare Christian and secular societies, what do we see? In Christian societies, we see more charity work, lower depression, lower suicide, better mental health. We see less authoritarianism. Listen, you're not going to get rid of the right. The right is always going to be there, even if you're a leftist, okay? What happens in secular societies on the right when you remove Christianity? You get authoritarianism. You get these kinds of nationalistic things. They happen. You can't prevent it. You should want everyone on the right to be a Christian. Oh my goodness. You will prevent so many problems. Why are you not promoting that? Why are you not going around saying, yes, everyone on the right should be Christian? Okay, you'd fix a lot of the problems you have, as I cited in my opening statement. So that's another important point. And again, you will get sustainable birth rates. We won't have the problems in Europe right now, where you have mass migration of Muslims coming in that are now trying to change the culture and try to push Sharia law in places like Britain. That is a problem, especially for women. I, as a Christian who believe in human rights and understand that women's rights and human rights came out of the Christian tradition, don't want to see that happen. So this is why I favor a Christian society, because you will have a society. Listen, for generations, we kept Islam out of Europe, and then all of a sudden we became secular and we started inviting them all in. What happened? Christianity can keep out these dangerous ideas. Secularism opens the door for them to come in and destroy everything. Okay? If you don't want Islam to destroy Europe, you should prefer a Christian society. That much is pretty obvious. If I'm wrong, then seculars need to start producing sustainable birth rates so they don't have to keep inviting immigrants in to replace their declining and aging population. This is a huge problem that secularism is indirectly creating. Okay? That is, at the end of the day, that's just the truth of it. So again, in terms of pro-sociality, charity work, okay, depression, suicide, Christianity is producing much better societies. Secular societies produce people that are selfish and depressed at the end of the day, because again, they're not doing the same type of things that Christians are doing. So it may sound good. We can do this armchair science where we just say, well, secularism sounds better, doesn't it? Does it actually produce the effects it claims to produce? No, it doesn't. Christianity actually does. Thank you.
And we'll switch it over.
I mean, Lawrence Krauss, it's okay, man. Tap out. You know, just say you give up. Just say, you know what? Just concede. Just concede. You still have time to save face here. Okay, you still have time to save face, so your butthole doesn't have to keep getting blown out by Mike Jones. What do you guys think about this debate so far? Do you agree with Mike Jones? Do you agree with Lawrence Krauss? Sound off in the comment section below. Let's see how much longer this massacre goes on for.
We have our final rebuttal speech. This is 5 minutes from Dr. Krauss, and then the open dialogue.
Ever since Eve, Christianity has not treated women as it took a long time before women had it.
These are always the arguments that these atheists go toward. Ma women, ma homosexuals, ma slavery. Those are always those go-tos of why Christian is bad, because ma women, ma homosexuals, and ma slavery.
All religions in general, all the major religions, not just Christianity, Islam is one of them, have tended to make life difficult for women. To argue that somehow Christianity is the basis of women's rights is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. The notion that somehow we don't have a self-sustainable society. When I was your age, the population of the world was about 3.5 billion. The population of the world is 7 billion right now. We seem to be doing a pretty good job of producing babies, and by 2050, the population of the world will be 10 billion. There's this notion that somehow society cannot sustain itself unless we convince people that the only I won't go into the sickness of sex in Christianity. It's not worth going into. But in fact, the most sustainable, where do you have the most people? China, which is not particularly a society I admire, but they've done a pretty good job of producing a population, well over 1 billion people. If that's your notion of if sustainability is somehow a notion, biological sustainability determines what's good or what's useful in the long run, then China is a great example of that. In terms of, we have Christianity to thank, the Middle Ages. Would I want to live in a world in the Middle Ages which had Christianity? I don't. Well, of course, that's a hypothetical because we don't know what the world was like. But I can guarantee you what we wouldn't have had was the burning of witches. And in fact, that's a great example. To me, the burning of witches is a really interesting example of history of science and how it's changed things. Because there's really good historical evidence that's been discussed that, in fact, the ending of the burning of witches happened around the same time as Newton developed Principia. Because what Newton told us was that, in fact, the same laws that govern an apple falling on Earth govern the cosmos. And not only that, the cosmos was understandable, and that physical effects have physical causes. That changed everything, because suddenly it made the notion that the fact that the weather was bad wasn't due to a woman who you didn't like in a village that you could burn. The notion that supernatural causes of effects went out the window came with Newton. He was, by the way, ultimately quite religious, I would say. But that Newton's result that the world was understandable and comprehensible, and that physical effects have physical causes, ended that kind of religious nonsense. And so, in fact, I guess I would say the end result, I would say, is that I guess I quote a late friend of mine, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg, who was an atheist, but he said, there are good people and bad people. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things. When good people do bad things, it's religion.
Okay. Thank you very much for that rebuttal as well. We're going to kick it into the open dialogue. Gentlemen, the floor is all yours.
Have you read the Lombard Law Code of 643?
No.
It says, let nobody presume to kill a foreign serving maid or female servant as a witch, for it is impossible and ought not to believe by Christian minds. The canon episcopal from around 900 AD stated witchcraft did not exist. Why were these happening in the early Middle Ages if burning witches was a huge Christian tradition?
Well, look, actions speak louder than words.
Okay, well then.
Yeah, hold on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can I finish? Yeah. Okay. So, just explain to me who ran the Inquisition. No, just tell me. Was it just who ran it?
Catholic.
Oh, sorry, the Catholics, the bad Christians?
That's not what I said.
No, okay, so who ran the Inquisition? That
Catholic
burned witches, that tortured people, that did unbelievably depraved things.
Have you read Nathan Johnstone? He's an atheist.
I don't need to read people. I know
you don't do a lot of reading.
I mean, I read a lot.
Nathan
But
Johnstone.
quoting people is not the same as talking about how the world works.
Okay.
It really frustrates me. People say, this person said this. The point is, we know what the Inquisition said. I don't need some guy to say, well, the Inquisition was distorted Christianity. You're asking me empirically, once again.
But you're bringing up like anecdotal evidence of why Christianity is bad. Like, yes, there are Christians who have done bad things. We're all us as human beings, we're all fallen, we're all sinners, we're all sinful. So yeah, we're not perfect. There's only one perfect being, and that is God. But we are not perfect. And so therefore, yes, we do bad things, whether we're Christian, whether we're secular, what have you. But that doesn't change that the overall value that Christian ethics brings is a better society.
You said it yourself. It's not what's good and bad. I like a lot of things that Jesus said. It's not what's good and bad. It's what happens. And ultimately, Christianity had the Inquisition, and whether you like it or not, secularism produced the liberal Enlightenment.
Well,
I
then-
repeat once again that you said, what evidence is there? I'm giving you the evidence of the liberal Enlightenment and what it's brought us, and that was not Christian.
Well,
that
listen,
was liberal secularism.
If we're just going to do bivariate means comparisons, I can do the same thing. Your secular liberalism produced the Jacobin Revolution in France. It produced the USSR and communism, which killed hundreds of millions of people in China, USSR, across the world, these kinds of things. So if we're just going to say, listen, let's just look where the Christians are and let's see the bad things they did. Well, clearly Christianity is responsible. I can do the same thing with your secularism.
No, but
It's quite easy to do that.
you were quoting the Middle Ages in particular. That's what broke me up when you
Okay,
said we'd rather
well,
have a world with
Do you
Christianity.
understand what different variables are? Like, there's like, for example, if like someone goes in, like a vegan goes and shut up the headquarters of YouTube many years ago, we understand there's multiple variables at play.
Yeah.
It wasn't veganism that caused her to do
but
that.
why? But you keep saying that. But that's exactly what you're doing. You're arguing that secularism has produced some bad things. Of course it has. I told you there are good people and bad people. They're good religious people. They're bad religious people. They're good. And you know, that's I'm asking empirically. Look at the world of the 20th century, which whether you like it or not, is based on the secular liberal Enlightenment and science, and the realization that science gives no evidence for purpose or evidence for God, no evidence of infallibility, no evidence that humans are special creations, none of that.
Then why
and that
is-
produced the kind of society that we have today. And that our society has lots of problems today. Let me not suggest that we live in a perfect world, but progress happens by people realizing, looking at the world, realizing that things are bad and trying to fix them. Not saying it'll be okay after you're dead.
Then why isn't secularism fixing the problems? Why is it the Christians that it's producing
With,
better mental health, more charity work, sustainable populations? If this is all from secular humanism, then why is the research coming out of the secular humanist culture showing that Christianity produces far better results?
Well, look, once again, let's look at the results of what came out of Christianity and what came out of secularism. What came out of secularism are the very studies that you're talking about, the very framework of the academies on which universities
you're
are based. Now, I will tell you, for example, that I've been a scientist for 45 years, let's say, something like that. I've never once in any context, in any discussion about the world and how to solve problems or how to address the challenges that we face as a society or as or technical challenges, I've never once heard the word God mentioned. It's irrelevant. Christianity is simply irrelevant to what is going on to producing, effectively changing the world. Whether you like it or not, the progress that has been made in our understanding of nature and our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of how to treat others, our understanding of what women are like compared to men, what animals are like compared to humans, the sympathy and empathy we have for other beings has all come from a better understanding of ourselves, and that better understanding of ourselves did not come from revelation. It came from empirical studies and science.
Okay, are you done filibustering? Because I have a lot to say here. So,
Well, if you're talking is filibustering, I'm done with it.
okay,
yeah.
so you're assuming somehow that Christianity is incompatible with these things. No. Again, Christianity. Well, if you say no, you're proving my point. Christianity produced a lot of these things you like rationality, science, and these kinds of things. It came out of the Christian tradition for a reason. It's because of things that James Ungariano talks about in his book Of Popes and Unicorns. The early Christian thinkers, the natural philosophers, believed the universe was rational, that it had laws that could be discovered.
So did
and they
the
thought they
Greeks.
had minds that could actually do. No, the Greeks actually were doing something called proto-science. They were not actually doing real science.
Oh,
They got
really?
in rooms
Okay,
and
who
they based-
determined the circumference of the Earth? Christians or the Greeks?
It was the early Greeks who did
Yeah,
that,
I
yes.
know. So they were doing science.
They were doing proto-science.
What is
similar
proto-science?
Okay, so what they often did is they'd get in rooms and they discuss various different
No.
philosophies. Are you going to let me
Zach,
finish, or are you just going to keep interrupting
How
me?
did we determine the circumference of the Earth? Tell me. Do you
Okay,
know?
I'm
Do you
going
know
to
how
look
they
at-
proto-science did it?
Yes, it was
You're,
in
you're
Egypt.
Did you read it in some history
It
book?
was
Tell
in
me.
Egypt.
No,
Okay.
tell me how it was done.
Okay, let me
It
finish
wasn't
now.
from a Bible. It wasn't from a thing. It was someone doing a damn experiment.
Yes.
That's science.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Calm down. You'll be okay here. Okay, so let's go back. Again, early Greeks were often doing proto-science. They would make minimal observations, and then they would try to develop these different philosophies they could use to find out what is going to be the most coherent worldview. Okay, so what happens is that through the Middle Ages, as Toby Huff and Edward Grant note, science starts to become developed as its own institution. It comes out of philosophy. This comes out of the Middle Age tradition, and it was scientists borrowing from the Greeks and from Christian traditions that allowed them to develop science into what it is. I would never say Christianity is the only thing that gave rise to modern science, but it was crucial for it. That's my point.
Okay, so.
So go back to your main point. We're
but so
talking
was-
about the
well,
modern
just point
day.
is, but my point was that the Greeks were able to determine, use rationality.
Of course.
I mean, you must admit, if you like philosophy, that the Greek philosophers from Socrates and Plato were useful thinkers,
Of course.
secular thinkers. They believed at that time. They believed in many different gods, and
Yeah.
the Greek gods were by far more interesting than our gods. They had a lot more fun.
You're
But,
claiming they're secular?
what?
Are you claiming they're secular?
I'm saying that they were when they were doing science. That's the important
So
thing.
anytime we do science, it's secular. I
Yeah,
mean, this is
yeah, absolutely. And here's the argument. It was a very famous biologist who said this. When he goes in the lab,
biologist. Remember that. Biologist, not historian or philosopher.
exactly, a scientist.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my point. He said, when I go in the laboratory, and by the way, there are a number of scientists who are deeply religious. It's proof that you can hold two inconsistent notions at the same time. But what he said is, when he goes in the laboratory, he is an atheist because he's assuming with no divine being is twisting the dials and determining, what the results of his experiments are. So if that's the case, if he's acting like an atheist when he goes in the laboratory, why should he not act like an atheist when he goes outside the laboratory? When people are doing science, and including the religious scientists I know, they put their religious beliefs aside, and that's fine because those are personal beliefs that are irrelevant to what the results of an experiment is going to do. So science is by nature secular.
So this goes back to my main point, though, is that Christianity created this separation of church and state. It gave rise to modern science. It allowed for these things to develop as their own. This is why we don't have the Islamic world where everything has to be governed by Islam. We allow for these different
Well,
institutions.
no, the difference
Early
is-
Christians talked about the two books of God, the book of Scripture and the book of nature. So this idea of these separate institutions comes out of Christianity.
The only different, look, I'm no fan of Islam, but one of the reasons Islam is what it is because right now the Quran is taken as a literal word of God. It used to be the case in Christianity, and that's why the Middle Ages in Christianity were very similar to the Islamic world now.
False.
The notion
early-
that you take that
Here's a thought, and this is not me interjecting, coming from a place of vast knowledge. Again, this is just my small brain thinking. But what if God created everything? Then that means God created science. And just because you have to use science to explain, the laws of physics or something like that, maybe, yes, obviously you can't just go in there and I don't know, an apple falls down from the tree at the rate it does because God said it does. I mean, yeah, obviously you can't do that, but that doesn't mean that God wasn't responsible for the way the apple falls from the tree and the rate it does. But maybe it's that we could allow science to explain why it falls the way it does. Much in the same way as if when, I don't know, Ford makes a car, right? But if you want to explain how the car actually works, you can't just say, well, Ford made the car work. I mean, yes, technically that's correct, but you can't, if you want to explain someone how to build your own car, or you can't just say that. You have to get a mechanic or someone to explain what makes the car work. So now I'm asking legitimately, is that the same way that you could use science to explain how God's creations work? Again, just more ponderings from my small brain. But in terms of this debate, this Lawrence Krauss got absolutely demolished by Mike Jones. Mike Jones brought the receipts. He brought the evidence. And in all these debates that I've seen where it's Christians versus secular humanists, or just debating secular ethics in general, these secularists, they always get blown out of the water. It's almost as if Christian really is best. But what do you guys think? How do you think Mike Jones did in this debate? Sound off in the comment section below. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoy content like this. And if you do enjoy content like this, I got more Christian versus secular humanist debates on my channel. I also got right-wing politics stuff on my channel. If you're into any of that stuff, I recommend you subscribe to my channel, check out my stuff. I upload 2 videos a day. And thank you very much.